Hi everyone, today I will be sharing my review and impression of Sarah Breskman Cosme's book, A Hypnotist's Journey to Atlantis, Eyewitness Accounts of Our Ancient History. I'm also going to share my perspective from a recent QHHD session that I experienced where I accessed the lifetime story of a woman on Lemuria. And I think it complements the information in this book very nicely. And yeah, it fills out the story a little bit. So also a little bit of a warning, if you have not read the book, I will be talking about the entire book and maybe giving some parts of it away. But I think that reading this book is I definitely recommend it. It's very much in the style of Dolores Cannon, and I find that when you read this style of book that's kind of in the reporter, from a reporter's perspective, it's very grounded and incredibly full of love and wisdom, because this information and these books are kind of being channeled with the love and guidance of wisdom of people's, humans, higher selves. So, which is like a deep place of wisdom and love that can be accessed by everybody. So this book is written with like the highest intention, one of the highest intentions. I mean, I don't know about the highest, but a pretty high intention, right? So one thing that was interesting while reading the book, I guess, just in terms of semantics, logistically, some of the reviews on Audible, so I listened to the book on Audible, said that the audio wasn't great and it wasn't perfect, and I have to say that that was sort of true, but I loved it. I found it made me feel like I was kind of sitting beside her, reading it very kind of casually. You could sometimes hear the pages being turned, and I appreciated that, actually. I quite liked that. There was one part where it seemed like maybe 2 pages had been skipped at the end of a chapter. And so now I feel like I need to buy the book and find what that is. But I mean, now that it's been about a month since I've read the book, it doesn't really bother me. And I might have the book. I always like having physical books to be able to highlight. But listening to it on Audible, yeah, was great. And it was read by Sarah herself, which I loved. I also got a bit sick while reading the book. I don't know if I was sick because I was energetically processing the information. I think that's part of it. Also, my illness gave me the space to listen to the book because I got to have a break from my kids and family and stuff. So that was very interesting. I think some of the important things that I want to mention regarding the information shared in the book is this idea of like Atlantis Lemuria, Atlantis versus Lemuria, that the two ancient continents and very evolved civilizations existed at the same time. And this is a relatively new concept for me. I used to always think only of Atlantis existing. I think in the book they're saying about 25,000 years ago that these stories take place, where Atlantis would have been a civilization that was quite advanced technologically, with flying mechanisms and their technology for building and lighting. They didn't use electricity in the same way, and I think they were a bit more used less of Earth's resources because of the advancement that they had, and also they were spiritually pretty advanced. They talk about speaking telepathically. Actually, I believe that's in Dolores Cannon's book, Convoluted Universe Book 1, which I'm also reading. So I might now be mixing the two stories of Atlantis. But this book, Sarah's book, goes into the origins a little bit more. She talks about crash landings of kind of humanoid beings from other planets arriving on Earth and seeding the Earth and mixing with the like primitive human type people who would have been living on Earth. This is very interesting. Dolores Cannon has many books where people channel this type of information. And that's one thing I like about these type of books or information is that one, it's not channeled from Sarah herself, from the author. It's channeled by people that she was working with, and also it's channeled by many people. So there's like many different people. I'm not sure how many people her book includes, but at least 5 or 6, if not more. And they're all kind of saying information that works with each other through channeled sessions. And that kind of blows my mind. Dolores Cannon has many books like this, like her Nostradamus books are very interesting, where she was, able to access and communicate with Nostradamus in the 1500s through one person, and a year or so later pick up with this Nostradamus character through another vehicle, she calls them, through another human, through another client. And that concept blows my mind. Dolores Cannon had to fight a lot more skepticism and criticism, I believe, in her time. She was publishing the books in the early 90s and accessing this information through the 70s and 80s. And there was still quite a bit of pushback in her time. So she would keep the recordings. She was very diligent about all her evidence, her transcripts. And this way she could, show people, have them listen. She had a lot of people come in and sit in on sessions to kind of blow their minds and prove the work that she was doing. And now I think there's a lot more openness to this kind of work. And so the information can just really flow. Now, one thing I will say about like any QHHT kind of accessed channeled information is that it is very hard to prove, right, the 100% validity of it. And I do like to keep a little bit of skepticism or kind of like intellectual thought and criticism over things. I think it's smart to protect ourselves and to always have a little bit of a filter of just reflection. I mean, maybe I will come to a point where I just said, yeah, I'm fully accepting all of this information, 100%, not thinking about it at all. It's all true and it just feels great. I think some people are maybe at that point and it's serving them, and maybe that's in their truth. For me, I'm always still kind of like sifting through it. And one thing that I do is I see how it sits in my body, and I take these as stories. It's kind of like the stories of our origin and creation stories that we have in our ancient books and writings, and other stories that are from other cultures. I love to listen to all of these stories and kind of take them into my psyche and digest them and see how they sit, how it feels true, and like process them through. And so this idea of the Earth being seeded by beings from other planets, so like extraterrestrials, is very interesting. And I think it's connected to some of our origin stories where they talk about like gods coming to them and sharing wisdom and information with them. In the Atlantis book, I believe in this one by Sarah, she says that some of the people who were able to escape Atlantis before it was demolished ended up being the ones who went and taught the more primitive humans in other parts of the planet things like agriculture and better building strategies and things like that. And that's comes up in many books, that there were these higher beings with all this information and knowledge and technology who shared it with the more primitive cultures of Earth. And of course, this kind of blows our mind of an understanding of our history as humans, of the history of this planet, as the history of like the universe, and how we are more connected to other planets and things like that genetically, but also I do believe that like some of our souls, have had experiences from other planets coming onto Earth. So it's all just like a crazy mishmash. But listening to the stories, there was quite a bit of truth that was sinking in and hitting me in a profound way. And so the story that Sarah tells is one of the main storylines is this one client who was a friend of hers who had no interest in anything esoteric or spiritual really, but had been suffering with like headaches from this tumor that was like a water bubble in her brain. And I think Sarah mentioned to her, oh, this is some of the work I do. I'm looking for someone to explore this work as I pass my level 3. And she was the client, so who did it. And this little tidbit story I find very fascinating, because the first life that was accessed was a lifetime in about the 70s of a woman. There's a lifetime in about the 70s of a woman who was very mentally distraught, and I think she ended up committing suicide in that lifetime. And that storyline was that she had been curious about some dreams and visions and impressions that she had, and she had connected with someone who taught her how to explore past lives, and so she was exploring past lives, connecting to some of the stories about Atlantis, and then trying to share them out loud. And then that ended up causing problems for her, where she ended up in a mental health institution where they, experimented and explored on her, doing lobotomies, a lobotomy and electric shock therapy on her brain to try to straighten her out because she was crazy. And I think this part of the story is so important. Because we have to remember, like I said before, in the 70s, 80s, even talking about a lot of this stuff was completely not accepted. On from a medical standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, within our families, maybe that woman would have been brought to a mental health center by her family members. And, we're not that far from the witch burnings and, sending people to sanatoriums for all kinds of different reasons of things that they even just spoke about. It's very important, it's like very, very, very recent in our like current modern history, that it's okay to talk about these things and explore these topics. And so the message from that lifetime was that, she shouldn't have given up. Suicide is in this kind of work, we definitely see that suicide in most cases is just racking up more karma for yourself. It's, you're trying to escape your current karma and life situation. And in most cases, that's not the best path forward. I did read one story, remember, in one of Dolores Cannon's books that, I can't remember which book it was in, but it was this woman who was in Asia somewhere, and her village was being attacked by an army coming in, and the women had thrown themselves off a cliff to avoid being raped and tortured and murdered by the assailants of their village. And so in that case, her soul had said that it wasn't like escaping karma or building new karma with choosing that death. Now, I know that's a heavy topic, and if suicide is anything, that's been close to you and your family, I hope I'm not stepping on anything. I have had, suicide ideation myself at times, so I don't speak of this lightly, but for me, it has helped understand, I guess, the a soul's journey through suicide. And well, in that lifetime, that woman did commit suicide and came out, had some healing time in the other worlds, and came back to this lifetime where she was now the client of Sarah doing this work. And so I think also what happens on the other side is they kind of look at, well, what went wrong? You know, how can we help you face the karma that needs to be faced and do the job that needs to be done, with maybe more support, or like, you know, so it's not necessarily like, oh, you have to go back and face the exact same problems again. I think on the other side, from what I've seen, it's more, what happened and how can we help you, you know, accomplish that work in a better way. So maybe there was something missing from other beings as well. So I found that very interesting. And there is a point in the story where at one point that brain tumor heals, because it was there to force her to come into this form of healing and get the story out. So again, it was this kind of like, I have to get the story out. And that woman connected to a lifetime where she was apparently a princess and then queen of Lemuria at the time that Lemuria went down. So Lemuria is the Atlantis and Lemuria were like polar opposites of each other, almost, in a sense, where Lemuria was a place where the people were maybe more influenced by the feminine. From her version of the story, it was like a matriarchal society, and even the princess didn't ever have intercourse with men. To get pregnant, they would like mix the semen of many men and inseminate the queen and princess, for them to have children, so that it wouldn't be like attached to a man, which is interesting. And the Lemurians did have like a beautiful palace, and they had some, you know, buildings and economy and all the things, but they weren't like technologically very advanced, whereas the Atlanteans advanced more in technology and innovation, but were maybe lacking some of that feminine aspect and some of that heart aspect, some of that love aspect. And in her version of the story, the Atlanteans knew about the Lemurians and wanted their secrets of health and vitality, because in their continent they had been experiencing a virus that was killing a lot of people, and they had tried to come up with vaccines to to prevent the virus, and their version of the vaccine was just cutting a little incision into some people's skin and putting in like the genetic or vaccine sludge whatever into their wound, and then putting a band-aid over it of some kind of a bandage. So they didn't have injections like we have now. But one of the messages was that this was like related to the theme of vaccines and viruses and illnesses that the earth is now experiencing, which was very interesting. And the Lemurians, so there was also this kind of storyline about crystals, because the extraterrestrials that would have come to Earth had these crystals and this technology from other planets that they brought with them. And the Lemurians knew how to use this crystal to maintain health and vitality on their continent and for their people. They were also able to like connect with their ancestors and their people on the other planets where they would have come from. And the Atlanteans would have kind of forgotten this information. So the story is that the Atlanteans came to Atlantis to try to learn this, and when they found that the queen was not going to give them the information, they killed her. And then there was this princess who was the client who was being regressed, became queen. And then the Atlanteans decided to like terminate Lemuria by creating a tsunami wave that would destroy the continent and all the people. And but they would save the princess by like putting her in an energetic bubble and bringing her to Atlantis to kind of study her and ask her questions, where she stayed for about 60-70 years until she could pass on her wisdom and knowledge to someone trustful, and trust that girl would be saved. and then she basically blew up Atlantis. So that's kind of a bold story that this would have, she would have connected to the lifetime of the Queen of Lemuria, who would have been kidnapped by the Atlanteans and who would have been responsible for the destruction of the island of Atlantis. I'm still kind of processing that information. I don't think I've like fully 100% accepted it in my body and psyche. I can feel that I haven't, and I think I'm waiting for more evidence, like from other sources. But I think it's plausible, and I'm just kind of keeping it in the back of my mind. There were interesting parts talking about Mount Shasta, where there were people from Atlantis. Basically, there were immigrants. They did go to other places, and so while the continents of Lemuria and Atlantis were decimated, there were people connected to those continents and to those bloodlines who had come on to other parts of lands on Earth. And this is important in what I will share about Lemuria with my personal experience. But I found the Mount Shasta tidbits very interesting, that there are kind of like Atlantean type beings with a lot of information and high spiritual involvement that are still living within Mount Shasta. And I would love to go there and feel the energies there and see what I think about it. There was some interesting parts in the book about, okay, so I might be going like off the rails here for some of you guys who have like never thought about these topics. I'm a bit shy to do so and kind of talk about all of this, but at the same time, I'm very curious and open to these things. And I have encountered some of them in my own QHHT sessions. So one thing they talked about was this idea of like chasms, where using the crystals and at certain times of the year, she called it a chasm, can be open and you can jump into it and it'll like teleport you to another place on Earth. And I have actually seen this in one of my QHHT sessions many years ago back in Montreal, where this woman saw herself as a man living around the Grand Canyon, and he could like portal himself to different areas of the canyon. He could be at the top and jump into a portal and go into the bottom and go to all these different places through a portal. And this woman had never really thought about or experienced this kind of thing herself in her lifetime. It was kind of like, this is what's coming up, this is what I'm doing, and just sharing it. So that was very interesting. And also in the book, they spoke about cat people. So they were saying that in Atlantis, they were doing genetic testing, trying to, improve our physical bodies by mixing human genetics with animal genetics. So for example, they tried to create these cat people that would be more agile and more intelligent in some ways, because they could like focus on things. So there's this whole chapter about these animal people experiments that kind of went wrong, actually, because they weren't treated very well after they started coming out and being a little bit different and weird. They were used just for scientific experimentation and then like shipped off to an island and murdered. But there was mention of these kind of cat people, and that's very interesting because I have also regressed someone who saw herself on a different planet, but as like a cat type person with a tail and ears and, more agility and stuff like that. So that was very interesting, like a humanoid, feline kind of person. And again, I'm not saying that any of this is 100% absolute fact. I just like to take in the information, look at the information and see how it sits and what I think about it, and keep open for more information to, turn me one way or another. Another one was, there's a whole chapter on mermaids and how they were testing mermaids, and the way that they described them, so they said the mermaids were kind of created or seeded onto Earth when many years ago, when the first humans were seeded onto Earth. Mermaids were also a part of that kind of experiment and still exist today. And I have also regressed someone who saw herself as a mermaid and described the being as like being very similar to what was described in Atlantis. And again, this person is not someone who's usually very connected to mermaids. She was connected to maybe other things like fairy people or something like that. And it was kind of a bit of a shocker, being like, why am I seeing myself as a mermaid? But there was, a bit of a storyline there. So that's been very interesting, because actually for me as a practitioner, I have only seen, I hadn't really seen much mystical, otherworldly type things yet. At all, I think at all. I had been getting just really typical past life stuff. So I guess I'm maybe more ready for that kind of thing. But it was interesting how some of my recent sessions involved those themes, and they showed up in this book. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about the book. One of the things that Sarah says is that many people right now are working through this karma. Like a lot of the Lemurians, Atlanteans are back now and ready to work through some of the karma. And so some of the karma for the Atlanteans is this idea of like innovation at all cost, control, and kind of like hierarchy in society. And for the Lemurians, I think it's like balancing out that they were missing some aspects of that innovation. But they had much love and a bit more respect for the earth, and were a lot more heart-centered, like feminine type of people. And so, and of course, there's that karma of what the Atlanteans did to the Lemurians and what that Lemurian queen would have done to Atlantis. And so a lot of that is being worked out. And I even wonder myself if like, I've just seen some things in the way that like friendships like work and dissolve, or with people not agreeing with each other, coming together, and then there being conflict and friction and being moved away. And part of my intuition is telling me that some of this is because of that karma between Lemuria and Atlantis. And so the idea is to overcome that and find friendship and teamwork, I think, between the two different energies and life stories, to create more harmony and to use each other's skills to create more harmony and advancement of humanity on Earth. What else did I want to add? Elise Breathwaite is someone that I encountered on through Katya Nova, through the Meet the Oracle kind of workshop vault that she did in early December. And she's a channeler. I find her fantastic. My body like resonates quite a bit with the things that she shares. And she was also talking about this idea of this old karma that humans are now kind of ready to take on. And there's a lot of the souls coming in to work through that karma from that time. And so this was a workshop about using AI in like female conscious entrepreneurship. And that, so there is this idea of this karma of using technology in maybe negative ways or misintentioned. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like a theme that I see coming up quite a bit recently. Yeah, and one thing that Sarah says is, so Lemuria would have been destroyed by a wave, and Atlantis would have been destroyed by like a huge explosion. And Sarah says that she's regressed quite a few people who have seen this wave. So also Lemuria would have been in the Pacific Ocean and Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean. So Sarah herself actually lives in like the Florida Keys, which is one of the closest areas to where Atlantis would have been, which is interesting. So she says she attracts a lot of people who are looking to work through some of that Atlantean karma because she's so close to that area. And yeah, Lemuria would have been more in the Pacific Ocean. And so some of these people have seen this wave. And personally, so that's kind of getting into my personal story. I'm just going to charge my phone here. Let's see. Excuse me, I might not edit this. I'm gonna have to pull this closer. Okay. Hope that's all right. Spend all that time finding the angle that I like, and then I have to charge my phone, of course, and I don't think I'm going to be editing this out because editing takes quite a bit of work, way more than you would think if you kind of haven't done it before. Okay, so that brings me to my personal Atlantis story. So I don't know if any of you remember back in 2007, I believe it was, there was a tsunami. I remember it was at the New Year. And coming back to school after the holidays, like I was still processing this tsunami that happened in Indonesia. It just really hit me. And I remember seeing the videos of the wall of water, and I almost became, I did kind of become atheist from that experience, from watching that, from seeing that, because I was just like, how can God, if there is a God who's all powerful, allow a wall of water to just destroy people? It hit me very profoundly. And as Sarah was mentioning this, that many people kind of have this karma with this wave of water, I was thinking, oh, maybe, I have something, there's something there for me. So I was very much looking forward to doing a QHHT session along these lines. And I had it this week with my friend Lena, who's amazing. And we're actually exchanging sessions back and forth with each other. And in QHHT, you're first kind of guided to imagine a beautiful place. And my beautiful place was a beach on the Atlantic coast of the south of France, just really wild and rugged and, full of nature's power. I didn't want to leave that scene, but I had this intuition kind of say, like, don't worry, you're going to another coastline, another beach, so don't worry. So I went up on the cloud and came down on a coastline that was like very rocky, kind of reminded me maybe more about Ireland or England, but warm, not like extremely tropical warm, like hot, not hot, but warm, just perfect, just like 25 degrees, that kind of perfect weather. To a woman, I described her as looking like Zendaya. I recommend you look her up. She's like incredibly beautiful. And this woman was very beautiful, with very similar hair, like wavy chocolate brown hair. So my hair is maybe a bit more ashy and blondish, but like this, like a milky chocolate brown, like the same hair color that Zendaya has, that I just find so beautiful. And yeah, looking a bit like Hawaiian, like Pacific kind of person with darker skin. And she felt very light on her feet, kind of like a dancer, very graceful, and with so much love for her land, for her people, just like glowing and overflowing in this like Venusian love. And she was with her younger sister on this beach, and they were staring out at the water, and kind of, she was teaching her meditation practices. And so I'm not going to share everything. I'm going to share what's like important to the story and to kind of fill the storyline of Lemuria. So this older sister was teaching the younger sister meditation practices, and at one point there was a feeling of sadness that came up, and before I could even acknowledge or speak it out loud that I was feeling this sadness, Lena, the practitioner, said like, "Oh, what are you feeling?" Because I guess she saw the change on my face. And I always love that with QHHT, like we can see the external wave of emotion coming over the person before they've even consciously thought about it or processed what's actually happening. And so I had this tear come down the side of my face, and it was as I was looking at this little girl, I just felt great sadness because I realized that she wouldn't make it to my age. So I was about 22 and the little girl was about 6, and that she wouldn't make it to my age, because there would be a big wave that would come and destroy the continent and the people. And so she knew this girl, she knew it for a while. And we got to, take a look a little bit at the culture and how she lived her life and what she did with her sister and what her job was. And so her job was to be a messenger between the people who worked and lived in the temple and the palace. And so she was writing and teaching and relaying messages. And so from my perspective, and it was not hard, but I really attempted to just allow the information to flow through whatever would come without doubting or judging or rationalizing or thinking, because that's kind of the work in QHHT in that moment, is to just let it come out and surrender, and later think about it. So what came through was that she was relaying messages, and the people in the temple knew about this wave. They knew about this destruction that was coming, and she would relay it to the palace. And the queen, that initial queen, didn't really believe in it, didn't want to believe in it, didn't think that her whole culture and continent could be destroyed, so kind of just brushed it off. The younger princess knew and was aware and could also feel like intuitively this impression, but didn't have much power, I guess, to do anything about it. And it was like two very different like cultures and life experiences, right? So this also, for me, goes to show how we can see one event, one accident, one experience, and the stories and perspective that will be told about this one situation by 5 or 6 different people will be very different. And, going further, the stories that the souls are going to tell is going to be very different. So if someone dies in an accident, we can have one perspective on this side, living on earth. And if we were to talk to the soul on the other side, we would be able to get like a different story. We can sometimes, create some extra drama around this. And I'm going to get to that. And again, this not to diminish anybody's like strong experience with death of loved ones in accidents or things like that. I have that in my family. And that's actually part of why I'm in this work, because I can see how our the way that we perceive what happened greatly influences the rest of our life and the rest of our relationships and how we're going to live and show up in the world. So this woman knew that the wave was coming, and what she was saying, so she felt that the palace wasn't really listening, the government wasn't really listening, and she felt that it was such an inevitable thing that was coming, that she just decided she would work on herself internally to accept the situation and elevate herself above it, so that when it were to happen, she could take her sister to the beach, they could sit in meditation, leave their bodies because they had done, such strong spiritual work and advancement that they could leave when they chose. And then from the other side, because they would be in such a strong state, help the other souls to transition through to the other side. And that's what happened. I guess, I don't know if you guys want to hear any more details from that lifetime. There was something interesting where it was only the two sisters living together in a home, a very simple, like clay home. And the parents were working in some government type jobs. And the message was that because that older sister was such a good caretaker and wanted to take on the role of caretaker, the parents were kind of free to go and do what they wanted to do. And so everyone was very happy and satisfied. Like the little girl wasn't missing anything. I had kind of taken a look at how like conception happens. Is there men involved? Because in the book they had said that the princess is inseminated. And from what I saw for like the regular people, there were men involved. It was kind of like a man and woman would come together. They'd feel a certain attraction. They would feel the charge of the child wanting to come through, and they would let the elders know. And it wasn't really like an asking for permission, because sometimes when a child wants to come in, it's coming in. It was more of like a warning, like, hey, there's a child coming. And so then from that point on, the couple would be just very highly respected and honored and supported. And then in the pregnancy would be the same thing, deeply taking care of the mother. The father would be able to work part-time. The mother would like kind of not have any other big responsibilities and would be free to be just really involved in the community, helping in the school, in the kitchens, being allowed to rest and kind of go off to contemplation as much as she wants in her pregnancy. Because they put so much value and importance in a healthy pregnancy and a relaxed mother, a supported mother, because they knew that affected the health of the children coming in, like the whole culture. And they deeply, deeply understood that would affect all of them going forward, right? The health of the mother. This is something that I say that I'm like a broken record about in my community, that it's of utmost importance, and why I kind of do the work I do supporting mothers. And it's also not really a reality in our culture right now. So I've also had to just accept, the reality of this culture. In my last pregnancy and postpartum, I had a lot of anger and frustration over not being supported. And I think it's because on a soul level, I know what it can look like to be supported and how significant that is. But some of my work has been to let that go and accept the reality of that I'm in now, the culture I'm in now, and just try to bring back aspects of those cultures that I remember from past lives to this time on earth. And then, so at the moment of birth, the father was also present, but then afterwards, the father was less present, which is interesting. Like as soon as the baby was born, the father was less present, especially for that first year. There would be like grandmothers and other women kind of like helping the mother. She would be in the village with, the children and the school and other women and elder men, but not necessarily the father. Like he could go back to work if he wanted. And from my perspective, it was like then the parents were not really expected to stay together, because the community would take care of the mother and child. And then when the child hit the age of like 4 or 5, the mother was also free to choose what she wanted to do. And the child was like not really affected, because everyone in the community was like family and was like another mother. So that explains kind of this sister relationship, how that older sister was acting as the mother. And in that culture, it wasn't like a bad or negative thing. It was kind of like, well, what do all the souls want to do? Does one want to is happier working? Is that the way that they serve themselves and the community better? So that's what we're doing. Like there's no judgment about it. So that's kind of pertinent. And then approaching the time of the wave, originally I said it had come like 10 years. It was going to come 10 years after that first vision, that first time that we accessed these people. But I think it came a little bit earlier, and the message was that like that 10-year span was actually a protection in her mind. I think it was like 6 or 7 years from that point. That 10-year span was like a protection in her mind, that she had more time than she thought. But she was ready when it came. She felt it on the day. The people at the temple also knew, and so they were all doing these spiritual practices to elevate themselves, to purge fear and worry, and to trust like greater creator on what was happening. And like a big part of the sadness was the loss of the culture and the loss of the land that she felt very, very connected to. But so she had to let go of that attachment. Also the loss of her sister, of her little sister that she loved so much. That was probably maybe like the biggest one that I felt she had to work through. But on the day of, and the little sister, she explained to little sister what was happening, and the sister said, like, I know, I've known all along, like, what you've been doing. And they went to the beach, they kind of meditated holding hands, and they left their bodies, and they could see the bodies like sitting in meditation, but they were above them when the wave hit. And then they were just holding that love and just very, very high level of acceptance and understanding and connection to the divine to help the souls move through, and kind of for the soul to come through, not survive, but like come through that experience with as least trauma as possible. And from that side, I could actually see that there were like many people feeling that intuition. And I think some of the people who intuited what was going to happen left and went to go set up life, outside of Lemuria. So we do have descendants, like blood descendants of Lemuria on Earth, just like we do of Atlantis. And yeah, there were other people kind of helping to usher the souls through to the other side. And so this is where my point of like perspective makes a difference, because in the book by Sarah, the princess said that like those people experienced, the people who were left behind and who died in the wave, experienced immense trauma. Their souls had trauma, and they're still carrying that trauma now. And from my perspective, it wasn't everyone who was on the island who experienced trauma, and there were some souls helping to usher souls through the experience. Of course, there were some that weren't able to be helped, or also because they like chose not to. If they had it in their minds that this was a horrible, terrible thing, and they were feeding that drama, then they carried that trauma with them in other lives. Yeah, I don't know. It's like a big concept to kind of really process and digest, because I can see in my lifetime now how there are things that happen that just seem so horrible, of like the violence that humans do to each other, or accidents that just seem so silly, and loss of life. And then and then what we can do to ourselves and our minds, keep reliving the story, and like anger that we can have with God and with life for allowing that to happen. If we think about moving forward in love and harmony, carrying that energy with us, it doesn't help move forward in love and harmony, right? Of course, there's a period of healing and grief that has to happen, but I think in our culture and in our society, we're not very good at really helping people fully process and digest and gain perspective and connect to the deeper realities of existence and consciousness, and then moving forward with like love and harmony. I don't know. I find it's easy to talk about. In my own life, I'm like not even that good at staying grounded and moving beyond fear all the time. but it's an incredible storyline to connect to and think about and be inspired by, because that's not, really projected onto us or mirrored to us in this culture and society now. So I think my job is to take these stories, integrate them, and then live by them and lead and inspire people to be able to live on these planes of existence, basically. I feel at peace saying that. See, I'm like, yeah, that actually feels really true. That's sitting true. Yes, so that's all I wanted to share for today. It's a 50-minute video. I don't know how many of you will be watching, the whole thing. But if you have been around with me for this whole 50 minutes, I really appreciate it. And I would love to hear your thoughts and comments. Anybody who comments on here, it gives me so much energy to keep going. It shows me that people are listening and find this interesting and maybe want to hear more. Or if you post any questions or discussion points, I would love to explore what comes up for you guys. And if you, want to connect, you can do so by email or through my website or on Instagram or other social media platforms. On Instagram, I'm mostly active, and I share in my stories what I'm up to with my kids in my day-to-day life, homeschooling, and running a business, I guess, running life. And in the feeds, I like to share short videos about, different insights and perspectives that I have that just come through. So much love to you. Much, much love to you. May we move forward in love and harmony for the highest possible existence and potential that we have accessible to us at this time.